In this video, I'm going to show you a complete NBA totals model that you could also potentially apply to Major League Baseball, NFL, as well as college basketball. Super excited to show you this. My name's MGCovers. If you're watching this video for the first time, don't forget to follow me on Instagram. If you like this video after you watch it, you want to get some more sports betting content, follow me on Instagram. I put out a lot more content there than I do YouTube, average about 3 videos a week. Also, too, don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to get better at sports handicapping. We don't give out a lot of free plays on this channel, but we're dedicated to education of sports betting and helping you, the average bettor, become sharper at sports betting. Let's dive into this. I'm super excited to show you this. All right, so what I'm going to pull up first, those of you who follow me for any length of time know who Bob McCune is. If you're new, Bob McCune was basically a sharp way back in the day. He wrote, I think it was 4 books total. I think that's right. And this excerpt is from the Gambling Times Guide to Football Handicapping, written in 1984, but very applicable to today. And this is basically how I got started. I read a lot of his books, and some of the things that if you start reading his content, you'll see a lot of parallels between what I teach and what I believe in. Very similar to Bob McCune, which is where I learned it from. Now, what I want to do is we're going to talk about it. I'm going to show you an NBA totals model, but it's very important that we read this excerpt first. He says the average number of points scored in an NFL game was 41. If you do any kind of totals, the step one, you have to know the average number of points scored in a game. For example, Major League Baseball, I didn't wager totals this year, but I did 2 years ago. It was 9.2 runs a game. In soccer, it's 2.5 goals. And in NBA, and I'll show you that in a second, is 225 points is what totals, the total number of points scored average in an NBA game is right now based on our handicap. So let's go back and read this. So he did a 3-year study, 1980 to 82. In games where the opening line was over 41, the actual total score ended up 42 or higher 85% of the time. The converse of the first point was also true. Approximately 85% of the opening lines, numbers below 41, ended up 40 or lower. And then number 3, reading here, the higher the opening line was above 41, this is very important, the higher the opening line was above 41, the more prone it was to go over. The lower the number below 41, the more likely it was to go under. Playing the highest total on the NFL card over and the lowest number under produced around 70% winners in the 3-year study. Now, one important point to make, this was 1984. I do believe this business is harder now than it was back then. And this is, I think, my 11th year or 12th year in the business. I think it's harder now than it was when I started. So lines are sharp. It's very difficult for the books to lay a bad line. If they do, if it's off 2 points, it gets corrected very quickly in the marketplace because more people have access to online data. Whereas 1984, it was a completely different era. They didn't have computers and information moved relatively slow. And of course, I believe it was easier to, quote, beat the books early 80s. Now, he says something here. I'm going to read this. I actually disagree with this, and I'll read this. The lines maker is afraid to put the right number on a game because the average bettor will tend to play the under, a very high number, and usually an unusually low one. The lines maker job is to find the number that will split the action. Now, the reason I sort of disagree with that, I think that the book actually sets the correct number, but the fact that it looks extremely low, the average bettor will tend to play the over. And the same thing applies when the general public sees a very high number, they will say to themselves, wow, that number is very high, I'm going to play the under. Now, this is a very important point to understand and learn. The majority of time, what feels the right thing to do in sports handicapping, the opposite is true. And let me give you an example. You've heard of fade the public. That's kind of what we're talking about here. The majority of people that wager on sports lose money. So if you do what the majority does, you will lose money as well. The sharp approach would be to do the opposite of what the public does. And with regards to models, I have built a ton of successful models using only defensive stats. Now, that sounds like conventional wisdom would say that's probably not applicable, that wouldn't work, but in reality, it does. Another example, those of you remember baseball season, we do not use any pitching stats and have not for the last 2 years. 45 units in Major League Baseball 2 years ago. This past year, 35 units, so that's 80 units in the last 2 years, not using any pitching stats. Now, conventional wisdom will say that's not going to work because you have to have pitching stats in a Major League Baseball. And there's probably successful handicappers that did, but the point is that many times in this business, what you think works doesn't, and the opposite actually works. Now, let's apply this to NBA. So I want to pull up this screen here. Now, the average number of points scored in NBA, there's several ways to calculate this. I don't do a year-to-date total. I do a smaller sample size. But right now, the average number of points scored per team is 100.7 points per game. So if you multiply that times 2 is 225. So the average number of points scored for an NBA game is 225. Now, the way I'm putting together this particular model, I'm using the trigger point for unders under 217. I want to make it significantly under where the public is going to think, hey, we should play the over. So if the line is under 217, so if it's 217, we won't play the under. But if it's less than 217, we're going to play the under, which is basically 8 points from the average. And then the trigger point for the over is going to be 233, which is 8 points above 225. So if it's 234, we will play it. If it's 233, we're not. So now let's go back and dive into this last week's action. Now, this is a site called bookmakersreview.com, and we're going to look at the closing line as the line we're going to use to track this for NBA. All right, so let me write this down so I don't get confused. 217 and 233. So our first play here would be Brooklyn, New Orleans. We have 210.5. The line actually ended at 212, so that would be a loss. Next one here is 237.5. The game was 119 to 113, so that would be another loss. So we're 0-2 out the gate. All right. So let's go to Tuesday, 12th. And I'm going to go through these pretty quickly here. So our line is 212. That's a win. 214, that's a loss. 212, that would be, let's see, 0, 10, 11, that's a win. 235, that's 237, that's a win. 221 would be a pass. All right, so we're 3-3. Let's go to Wednesday. $218, $219, $232, $214. That ends on it's $214.5. Game ends on $214, so that's a win. $213, we play the under here. That's a loss. And that's it right now. So we're now 4-4 going into Thursday. No play there. So again, we're looking for lines under 217 and over 233. All right, here we go, 209. And again, this is a great example here. Line is 209, and I don't know what the numbers are on this, but I'm guaranteeing you the majority of the public played the over here. But in reality, the under actually cashed. So that would be a win. 216, this one goes over, so that's a loss. 238. Again, same deal here. You say, well, that's a really high number, but look at the total there. Was actually finished, what was that, 270? So that went way over. 242, 6, that's 246. That's another win. 217.5, that's a pass. There's a 215 number. Finishes on 229. That was a loss. 36, so this is an overplay here, and it finishes at 241. So we are now 8-6 going into Saturday. 217.5, that's a pass. Everything here is a pass. Now we go to Sunday night. Again, going through this relatively fast. There's 234. Houston and Chicago. That line finishes close. I mean, the game total was 250, so that's a win. 226, 221, and then we'll move on to Monday night, which was last night. 234. That line finishes on 234. Here's one 211.5. That finishes at total was 295. I'm sorry, I can't even add today. 95. So that's a win. 233, that's a pass. 235.5, that would be a play. That's a win. 212, we play the under. That's going to be a win. 235.5, that's a loss. And then 226. So again, so that finishes, if my math is correct, we finish at 12-7. Now, I do want to disclose this. I realize that this is a very small sample size. And will this work long term? I'm not sure. It might not, but even if it doesn't, I want you to understand the concept of conventional wisdom would say doing this, it would feel like the opposite would be true. Meaning if we play the over on the small numbers and we play the under on the high numbers, that this would win long term. But in reality, it's just the opposite. So super fascinating. And if you watch this video, and if anybody out there does a massive back test or a significant back test of say like 50 or 100 games, maybe for NFL, Major League Baseball, you can actually post the results here in the comments. I would like to see how this ends up. But super, super fascinating concept. And I think too, I'm going to go back and finish up and show you this final point. When you look at this and just understand how the average fan looks at this, you see a 234, 211, 233, 235. So when you see that 211, you would actually say, wow, that's an extremely low number. And you can see how the tendency would be to bet the over because it just looks so low compared to all the other numbers. But in reality, it was actually the correct play playing the under there. So anyway, super fascinating. Hope this helps. And if you want access to my actual lines for all my sports, I offer a service where you can get access right now to NBA, soccer, NFL, college football. We'll also have NCAA basketball. We're on a really nice run with NBA 5-0. If you want access to that, $50 a month. Also gives you access to over 180 coaching videos on the site. And then if you want access to everything I just mentioned, in addition to all my plays, $100 a month. And the best value, instead of paying $100 a month, you could pay $500. You save about $600 instead of paying $100 each month. You get access to everything on the website, all my plays, all my lines for all sports, all the coaching videos for $500 for an entire year. It's like getting an associate's degree in sports handicapping. If you want to join, there's a link in the description box. Like this video. Greatly appreciate you guys tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon. Peace.